I need to check the used names list carefully before writing. Used names. Cannot use. Haley, Marsh, Brandon, Brooke, Tessa, Claire, Diane, Ryan, Margaret, Natalie, Joel, Serena, Marcus, Adrian, Kevin, Patricia, Camille, Owen, Renata, Sandra, Lena, Derek, Elaine, Renata, Sandra, Lena, Derek, Elaine, Gwen, Mara, Jess, Colton. I'll use Nora, narrator, Todd, husband, Ruth, older woman who rescues her, Caleb, son, Vivian, husband's affair partner. I don't know exactly what happened to me the night my husband left me at the hospital. I mean, I know the facts, I know the sequence of events, but there's a difference between knowing what happened and understanding it, and for a long time, those two things lived very far apart in my head. I was 26 years old. I had a 3-week-old son, a C-section incision that still burned when I left, and a husband who said he was going to pull the car around. He never came back. Let me back up, because the night itself doesn't make sense without the months before it. My husband and I had been together since college. We met at a party in our junior year at Ohio State. He was funny, loud in the good way, the kind of person who made everyone in a room feel like the most interesting person there. I fell fast. We graduated, got jobs, got an apartment in Columbus, and then, about 2 years in, I got pregnant. It wasn't planned. But I was 25, we were stable enough, and when I told him, he said, "Okay, we'll figure it out." He said it calmly, and I told him, he said, "Okay, we'll figure it out." He said it calmly, and I took that calm for strength. I was wrong about that. I would be wrong about a lot of things. The pregnancy was hard on my body. I had hyperemesis for the first 4 months. The kind of nausea that puts you in the hospital for fluids because you can't keep water down. I missed work. I missed social things. I became, in my husband's words, a lot to deal with. He didn't say it once. He said it in the way people say things they mean. Offhand, casual, like they're just stating a fact about the weather. "You've just been a lot to deal with lately, Nora." As if being sick was a personal failing. I told myself he was stressed. He was working long hours at the architecture firm. The pregnancy wasn't in the plan. I made excuses the way women do when they love someone who is slowly showing them who he really is. Caleb was born in early February, in a snowstorm by emergency C-section after 18 hours of labor. He was perfect. 6 pounds, 4 ounces, dark hair that stood straight up. I cried when they put him on my chest. I looked over at my husband and he was looking at his phone. The first 2 weeks home were a blur. I was recovering from surgery, trying to breastfeed, running on 2-hour sleep cycles. My husband went back to work after 5 days. He said he couldn't afford more time off. I didn't argue. I just kept going. 3 weeks after Caleb was born, I woke up with a fever of 103. My incision site was red, swollen, warm to the touch. I knew immediately it was infected. I called my OB and she told me to come in right away. My husband drove me. He seemed annoyed from the moment we got in the car. I could feel it radiating off him. That particular silence that meant I was inconveniencing him. I held Caleb's car seat with both hands and stared out the window at the snow still coming down, and told myself I was imagining it. At the hospital, they confirmed a wound infection and said they needed to admit me for IV antibiotics. Possibly 2 days, they said. Maybe 3. I looked at my husband holding Caleb. The baby was crying, that thin, reedy newborn cry. And I saw something on my husband's face that I still can't name. Not love. Not fear. Something closer to resentment. He handed Caleb back to me and said he was going to get the car from the parking garage and bring up the bag we'd packed just in case. "I'll be right back," he said. He kissed my forehead. I thought it was strange how formal it felt. That was at 4:57 in the afternoon. I remember because I kept checking my phone. 5015, 5:30, 6 stereo. I called him. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. The nurse had helped me get settled into a room by then, and Caleb was in my arms, and I kept telling myself there was an explanation. Car trouble. His phone died. The parking garage had no signal. I built a tower of excuses and stood on top of it because the alternative, the thing underneath, was too much to look at directly. By 8 p.m., the tower had collapsed. He wasn't coming back. I didn't have proof yet, not really, but some part of me, the part that had been paying quiet attention for 2 years, already knew. I had my phone. That at least. I hadn't left it in his car. It was in the pocket of my hoodie, which I'd carried into the hospital myself. Small mercy. I didn't have my wallet, though. It was in the diaper bag he'd taken. I didn't have the extra clothes I'd packed. I didn't have the nursing pillow or the spare pacifiers, or any of the things I'd carefully organized for exactly this kind of overnight. What I had was my son, a hospital gown, an IV in my arm, and a phone with 34% battery. I called my mom in Michigan. She burst into tears and said she'd drive down in the morning. I told her to be careful on the roads. We were both pretending I was fine. I lay there that night with Caleb on my chest, listening to the machines beep, and I thought about how I had gotten here. Not to the hospital, to this life. This version of a life. I thought about the girl I'd been at 22, who thought love was enough if you just chose right and tried hard. I thought about all the times I had tried harder when I should have paid closer attention. Sometime around midnight, a woman knocked on my open door. She wasn't a nurse. She was wearing a regular cardigan, dark green, with a small embroidered flower near the collar, and she was holding a paper cup of coffee like she'd been walking the halls for hours. She was maybe 65, with silver hair cut short and glasses pushed up on her forehead. "Sorry to bother you," she said. "I'm Ruth. My husband is 2 rooms down. Hip replacement. I saw your light on and I heard the baby and I thought maybe you could use some company." I don't know why I said yes. I was exhausted and raw and not in the habit of talking to strangers, but something about the way she stood there, not pushing, not performing concern, just offering, made me say, "Sure, come in." She stayed for 2 hours. She didn't ask me a lot of questions. She held Caleb for 20 minutes so I could close my eyes. And she told me about her own kids, grown now, spread across 3 states. She'd been a labor and delivery nurse for 30 years before she retired. She knew how to hold a newborn like she'd been born knowing it. At some point I started crying. I didn't mean to, I just looked at my son in the stranger's arms and thought, this is it, this is what we have, just us. And the tears came before I could stop them. Ruth didn't flinch. She just said, "You don't have to explain." Before she left, she took out a small notepad from her cardigan pocket, the kind with a wire spiral at the top, and wrote down her phone number and her address. She pressed it into my hand and said, "If you need anything when you get out of here, I mean it. I'm 20 minutes from this hospital and I've got a guest room that's just collecting dust." I thanked her. I tucked the paper into my phone case. I thought I'd probably never use it. The next morning, a text came through on my phone from my husband. No call, a text. "I can't do this. I'm sorry. I'll figure out the legal stuff, but I need you to know I'm not coming back. This isn't the life I wanted." I read it 4 times. This isn't the life I wanted. As if the baby had happened to him. As if I had manufactured Caleb out of thin air specifically to ruin his plans. There was a second text, sent a few minutes later. "I've been talking to someone. I think you probably knew something was off." I'm sorry for that too. I set the phone face down on the bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. So that was what the past several months had been. That was the shape of the thing I hadn't let myself see. When my mom arrived that afternoon, I showed her the texts. She didn't say a word. She just put her arms around me and held on. I was in the hospital for 4 days total. Ruth came back to visit twice. Once with a crossword puzzle book she said she had an extra of, and once with a small bag of things. Travel-size lotion, a pair of soft socks, a package of those giant hospital-grade pads that she said every postpartum woman needed and no one ever thought to bring. Practical. Thoughtful. No drama. On the day I was discharged, my mom took me and Caleb back to Michigan with her. I didn't go back to the Columbus apartment for 3 weeks, and when I did, it was to pack boxes. My husband was already gone. He'd taken his clothes, his gaming setup, the espresso machine I'd bought him for Christmas. He'd left most of the baby things, which told me everything about what he valued. The divorce was straightforward in the ugly way these things sometimes are. When one person has already emotionally exited long before the paperwork starts, there's not much left to fight over. We split what little we had. He agreed to child support. He saw Caleb twice in the first year, then once, then not at all. I'm not going to pretend the years after that were a redemption montage. They weren't. They were Tuesday mornings when Caleb wouldn't stop crying and I'd been awake since 3 a.m. and I had to be at my desk by 8 a.m. They were the specific arithmetic of being a single parent, every decision running through the equation of, what does this cost, who watches him, can I afford to get sick right now? They were birthday parties where I was the only adult who showed up alone. They were fine. They were genuinely fine and also genuinely exhausting. And sometimes, in the quiet part of a Friday night when Caleb was asleep and the apartment was too still, they were lonely in a way I couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't lived it. I got a better job eventually, moved from my mom's to my own apartment in Ann Arbor, made friends slowly, the way you do as an adult, carefully, in the gaps between work and parenting. Started running, which I'd never done before in my life, because it was free and I could do it at 5 a.m. before Caleb woke up, and it was the only 30 minutes of any day that were entirely mine. Caleb grew. He was funny like his father, but in a different way. Quieter, more observant, the kind of kid who noticed when you were sad and brought you a stuffed animal without saying why. He started kindergarten, then 3rd grade. Then he was 10 and I couldn't remember when exactly that happened. Then he was 16 and driving, and I had gray at my temples and a job I actually liked, and a life that felt mostly like mine. I thought about Ruth sometimes, not constantly, but in the way you think about certain people, the ones who appeared exactly when you needed them and didn't ask for anything in return. I'd lost the paper with her number sometime in the chaos of the move. I'd tried once to look her up. Ruth, Columbus Hospital, retired L&D nurse, and obviously that went nowhere. I had thanked her in my head 1,000 times. I didn't know I'd get to do it in person. It was Caleb who found her. He was 19 by then, a freshman at Michigan, studying social work, which surprised no one who knew him. He had this thing where he collected stories, the way other people collect vinyl or vintage sneakers. He'd sit with elderly neighbors and just listen. He said once that he thought everyone had at least one story they were waiting for someone to ask about. I had told him about that night at the hospital, not in a traumatic way. It came up one night when he was asking about when he was a baby. And I told him the truth. That there had been a hard stretch, and that a woman named Ruth had been unexpectedly kind, and that I still thought about it. He asked a few questions. I answered them. I thought that was the end of it. 3 months later, he texted me a photo. It was a screenshot of a Facebook profile. Ruth Calloway, Columbus, Ohio. Retired nurse. The profile picture showed a woman with silver hair and glasses pushed up on her forehead, holding a baby, someone's grandchild, probably, and smiling. "Is this her?" he wrote. I sat down. My hands were doing something strange, shaking, a little, in a way I hadn't expected. "I think so," I wrote back. "How did you find her?" I looked for retired L&D nurses in Columbus who were at that hospital in February that year. It took a while. Her name came up in an alumni thing from the nursing school. She was on a Facebook group for the hospital where she worked. I stared at the screen for a long time. "Caleb," I wrote, "you didn't have to do this." "I know," he wrote back. "But you deserve to be able to say thank you." I sent Ruth a message that night. I explained who I was. The young woman in room 14, the newborn, the snowstorm, the green cardigan, and I said that I had thought about her kindness for nearly 2 decades, and I hoped she was well, and I was sorry it had taken so long to find her. She replied in 11 minutes. "Oh my goodness," she wrote, "I remember you. I remember that baby. I've wondered about you both so many times. How is he?" We talked on the phone the following Sunday. Ruth was 73 now, still in Columbus, her husband 2 years gone. The hip replacement had been the beginning of a longer decline, she said, without self-pity, just as a fact. She had 4 kids, 9 grandchildren, and she still volunteered twice a week at a local women's shelter doing intake interviews for new mothers. Of course she did. I want you to know something, she said, near the end of our call. I knocked on your door that night because I heard the baby, yes, but also because I'd seen your husband in the hallway earlier. I don't know what I saw exactly, just something in how he left. I've worked with enough families to know when something wasn't right. She paused. I just wanted to make sure someone was with you. I didn't know what to say to that. I sat with it for a minute. You stayed, I finally said. That's what I remember most. You didn't just stop in and leave, you stayed. That's the whole thing, isn't it? She said quietly. Just staying. We've seen each other 3 times since then. Once I drove down to Columbus and took her to lunch at a Lebanese place she loves on the east side. Once she came up to Ann Arbor for a weekend and met Caleb in person. I watched the two of them sit at my kitchen table for 2 hours talking, and I thought, this is the most right a room has ever felt. Once more just last spring, we drove together to a small nursing education ceremony where a scholarship had been established in her name by former students. My ex-husband, I should tell you, did not fare well. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. Life rarely works like that, but in the slow, grinding way that happens when someone spends years prioritizing themselves at the expense of everyone else. He remarried. Divorced again. Lost a job. Moved to another state. Caleb at 18 reached out to him once, not out of longing, but out of the kind of clear-eyed curiosity that I think was more about closing a door than opening one. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. Caleb came home, made himself a sandwich, and said, I understand more now. He didn't elaborate, he didn't need to. I'm 34 now. I have a son who is 20 and kind and calls me twice a week without being asked. I have a job that challenges me. I have a 5 a.m. running route that I know by heart, through a neighborhood that turns gold in October, and that hour is still mine. I have a friend named Ruth who texts me photos of her grandchildren, and once sent me a care package with a crossword book in it. Because she remembered. I don't think about that night at the hospital the way I used to. It used to feel like the worst thing that had ever happened to me. And it was for a while. Now it feels like the line that split everything into before and after. And the after, it turns out, was mine. I built it, with bad coffee and not enough sleep, and a toddler who once drew on my work laptop with a permanent marker and 100 small impossible days that added up, eventually into something I actually chose. I chose it. That's the part no one tells you when you're sitting in a hospital bed with a newborn and a fever, and a phone with 34% battery. That you're going to choose it. Slowly, clumsily, on no sleep, in the gaps between everything hard. You're going to choose the life you actually want. And somewhere in that hospital, an old woman in a green cardigan is going to knock on your door. And you should let her in. I used to think the hardest part of what happened to me was the night itself. The fever, the IV. The phone going to voicemail over and over while my son slept on my chest, and the snow kept coming down outside a hospital window in Columbus, Ohio. I used to think that was the wound, but the hardest part wasn't that night. The hardest part was the years after it, the ones that didn't look dramatic from the outside. The ones that were just Tuesday, just Wednesday, just getting up again. Here's what I've come to understand about the way life actually works. Not in a tidy or poetic way, but in the way I've watched it play out in real time over 19 years. The choices people make don't disappear. They accumulate. Todd made a series of choices: to check out slowly, to lie, to leave. And those choices didn't just affect me. They shaped the person he became. And the person he became couldn't hold a second marriage together, couldn't hold a career together, couldn't hold much of anything, not because the world punished him, but because the habits of a person who abandons tend to compound. You can't practice walking away from hard things and then suddenly, one day, choose to stay. That's not how character works. And I made choices too. I chose to get out of bed the morning after I read that text. I chose to call my mom. I chose 100 times over to show up for Caleb even when I had nothing left. Those choices also accumulated. They built something, not quickly, not smoothly, but solidly. A life I actually recognize as mine. What Ruth did that night was a small thing, technically. She knocked on a door, she held a baby. She wrote her phone number on a piece of paper. She didn't solve anything. She didn't fix what was broken. But she stayed, and staying, just being present for someone in the worst hour of their night is not a small thing at all. It's actually the hardest thing. Most people don't do it. Most people walk past the light under the door and tell themselves it's not their business. Ruth walked in, and I have spent 19 years thinking about what that meant, and I still think it means everything. Caleb finding her, spending actual hours tracking down a retired nurse from a Facebook alumni group because he wanted his mother to be able to say thank you. That tells me something about what those hard years built. You don't raise a kid like that by accident. You raise him by being honest, by showing him what it looks like to survive something without becoming bitter, by letting him see you struggle, and also letting him see you Jekyll, and also letting him see you get back up. He watched me do that for his entire childhood, and then he grew up and did something quietly extraordinary with what he saw. If there's anything I'd want someone to take from this, it's not that things work out. Sometimes they don't. It's not that good people are always rewarded. They aren't, not in any clean or guaranteed way. It's this. The quality of your character is the one thing that belongs entirely to you. Not your circumstances. Not who stayed and who left. Not what you were given or what was taken. How you choose to act, especially when you're exhausted and scared and nobody's watching, that's yours. That's the thing that compounds over time. That's the thing that eventually builds a life or dismantles one. I'm 34. I have a son who calls twice a week. I have a friend named Ruth who texts me photos of her grandchildren. I have a running route that turns gold in October and an hour in the morning that's entirely mine. I built this. On no sleep, with bad coffee, one ordinary day at a time. You can too.